Next topic in Islamiyat is the Treaty of Hudaibiya. 6 years had passed since the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions had migrated from Mecca. But ever since the Prophet ﷺ and Muslims had migrated from Mecca, the Meccan had vowed never to admit them into Baitullah. They had unanimously resolved that as long as the Prophet ﷺ and his companions refuted the divinity of the Hubal, Asaf, Naila, these were the main idols which were situated in Baitullah and other chief idols of the Kaaba, and disbelieved in their gods and gods of their ancestors was against them, was obligatory, and it was incumbent upon them to bar their entry into Kaaba. The Muslims had been exiled under pressure, but they had not forgotten, nor could they ever forget, that they had the same right on the Kaaba as other tribes. Besides, the Muslims were connected with Makkah in many ways. It was their ancient and beloved country. The memory of the Makkah was a thorn which always pricked their hearts. Bilal had been cruelly persecuted in Makkah, yet whenever he remembered Makkah, he would weep. So this was the love of the country for them. However, both the Muhajirin and the Ansar were hopeful that one day Allah would grant victory to his Prophet ﷺ and his devoted companions and establish the supremacy of the Islam over all other religions. They were convinced that the moment would soon come when the Lord of the universe would open the door of Makkah to them. They would circumambulate the house of the Allah, and like others, they would also get the opportunity to discharge the duty which Allah has made obligatory upon the whole world. So the Prophet ﷺ had foretold on the spot that it was the last attack of the Quraysh, and henceforth the initiative had passed into the Muslims' hands. So this was the event when Battle of Ahzab took place. At that moment, Holy Prophet ﷺ told the Muslims that this is the last chance that Meccans had attacked us. Now this is the time for us. We will attack them now. So this was the moment which remembered. So the Prophet ﷺ had foretold on the spot that it was the last attack of the Quraysh, had henceforth the initiative had passed into the hands of the Muslims. So in the spring of the 6th Hijri, when Muslims were extremely eager to pay homage and circumambulate the Kaaba at the hour of the dawn in the Masjid-e-Nabawi, the Prophet ﷺ delivered the glad tidings to the Muslims of paying homage to Kaaba. So this was the big news. Ye shall indeed enter the inviolable place of the worship if Allah wills. This news spread in the Medina like wildfire. Every Muslim wondered how they would enter the Baitullah. Will they enter by fighting, or by launching an attack, or driving the Quraysh out of the Makkah, or will it be that the Quraysh will respect the rights of the homage and desist from barring their way? So these were the questions arising in the minds of the Muslims, how they will enter and how they will circumambulate the Holy Kaaba. So these were the questions. But in reality, the Muslims were to enter Makkah without fighting or mounting an attack. Prophet ﷺ had the whole program proclaimed in Medina. He ﷺ also sent deputations to non-Muslims tribal allies, inviting them to accompany him on the pilgrimage to Kaaba. But the Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam warned that no one should set out with the intention of fighting. However, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam desired that the maximum number of the Muslims should set out on the pilgrimage. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam want to have a lot of the people to come with him to visit the Kaaba, but not with the intention of fighting, so that the people of the Arabia may see clear evidence of the Prophet ﷺ's intention to avoid war on this sacred day, and they may be convinced that the Prophet ﷺ's objective is none other than to pay homage to Baitullah, this duty which Islam had prescribed for the Muslims was also fulfilled by the people of the Arabia as an obligation. For this reason, Prophet ﷺ took the non-Muslim tribes with him. The Prophet ﷺ was also mindful of the fact that if, despite his peaceful intentions, the people of the Makkah try to impose war on the Muslims, no one will support their actions. So this was a clever move. This was a very wise planning that everyone is seeing now. We do not want fight, but if war is imposed on us, no one will favor them. So this was a very wise move. No one will support their actions, nor join them in war against the Muslims. It will rather convince the others that the people of the Makkah, by closing the doors of the pilgrimage to Kaaba on them, wish to deflect them from the religion of the Ismail and Ibrahim. If the Quraysh took such an action, they would never be able in future to raise such a trouble against the Muslims. In such a case, the Arabs will clearly say the people of Makkah have debarred from pilgrimage to Kaaba these people whose swords were sheathed, who clad in ihram were walking ahead of their animals. These poor people had come only to perform circumambulation of the Kaaba. So this was the message. In response to the proclamation of the Prophet ﷺ, a very small number of the people of the non-Muslim tribes came forth for the journey of the Makkah. In Zikr 6 Hijri, the Prophet ﷺ set out from Medina with 1400 devoted companions to perform Umrah. His party included, besides the Muhajirs and the Ansars, some members of the other Arab tribes also. Starting from Medina, he ﷺ halted on the way of the Zul Halifa. This is the place where the Hujjaj coming from the side of the Medina put on ihram. So this is the place where they halted to put on ihrams. The atmosphere resounded with the voices of Labbaik, Allahumma Labbaik, Labbaik, La Sharika La Labbaik. The pilgrims tied up their locks of the hair. They took sacrificial animals and put collars round their necks so that the onlookers might understand that they had come to perform Umrah and not to fight a war. So they were showing clear signs. Swords were sheathed, sacrificial animals were with them. They were moving ahead of the animals. Collars were tied around their necks. Hairs were locked. So these were the signs that we are not coming to fight. We just want to visit the Holy Kaaba. Okay, not to fight for. According to the Arab customs, all Muslims carried swords, but they were sheathed. It had already been announced that the Muslims party was proceeding to Makkah to fulfill a religious obligation. The Prophet ﷺ, seated on his dromedary, Kaswa, was leading the caravan. So Prophet ﷺ was leading, riding on his Kaswa. Of the illustrious wives, only Salma was traveling with the Prophet ﷺ. So this is another point to remember, that Salma was the only faithful wife who was with him at this event. On hearing the approach of the Muslims, the Makkan pondered over all aspects of this situation and arrived at the conclusion that the object of their adversaries is performing Umrah was really to occupy Mecca. So they were misunderstood. In other words, the Muslims were coming to take revenge for Quraysh attack on Medina. The Muslims were approaching to capture their city by subterfuge. The Meccan discounted the report that the Muslims clad in ihram were arriving to perform Umrah and that they had proclaimed to the whole Arabia that they were going to Mecca to perform a religious duty. They were determined at any cost to prevent Allah's Prophet ﷺ from paying homage to and circumambulating the Kaaba. So they were misunderstood and they were determined not to enter Muslims into the Makkah. The Quraysh dispatched a contingent of 200 armed youth under the joint command of the Khalid bin Walid and Akarma bin Abu Jahl, who set up a checkpost at the Zitawa to bar the advance of the Muslims. So this was the first move of the Quraysh. On reaching Asfan, the Prophet ﷺ was informed by a man of the Banu Ka'b who was coming from the Makkah. The people of the Makkah have learned about your approach and they are burning with rage. Their army has arrived at Zitawa. Every soldier among them has vowed not to let you enter Makkah. Khalid bin Walid has brought his troops to Kara al-Ghamim. So this was the place, and Prophet ﷺ was informed that Khalid bin Walid has brought his troops at this place. On learning these developments, the Prophet ﷺ observed, I pity the condition of the Quraysh. They have ruined themselves in wars and have learnt no lesson at all. Today, if they had not prevented the Muslims and Arab pilgrims from circumambulating and paying homage, they would not have lost anything. In the present situation, if they overpower me, the Quraysh objective would be achieved. And if Allah grants victory to me, they will accept Islam in large numbers. But if they start the war of which they possess the power and for which they had set out from their homes, while the Muslims have only come out for paying homage and to circumambulating the Kaaba, they should make no mistake about me. By Allah, for the sake of the establishing Islam, I shall wage jihad all my life till Allah makes Islam supreme or my life ends. So the both parties were determined. Quraysh were determined not to enter the Muslims into the Makkah, and the Muslims were determined to pay a visit to Makkah and the Holy Kaaba at any cost. So the both parties were determined now. Presently, the Meccan army was seen approaching in the distance. Their manner showed that if the Muslims made a bid to enter Makkah, they would have to contend with great difficulties. The Quraysh would risk their lives for safeguarding their prestige and homeland. The Prophet ﷺ did not seek war, and yet, if he had to fight, it would be a war thrust upon him by the Quraysh. But then the Quraysh would get an opportunity to malign the Prophet ﷺ before all Arabia. In the case of the fight, the Prophet ﷺ had no doubts at all that the Muslims would unsheathe their swords and defend themselves gallantly. So definitely, if a war is thirst, swords will be unsheathed. Amidst these considerations, the Prophet ﷺ also reflected that if a fight took place, the Muslim objective would remain unfulfilled and the Quraysh would get a pretext to launch a propaganda campaign against the Muslims that they had come on a warlike expedition during this sacred period. So because Prophet ﷺ was extremely wise, he was understanding all kind of these situations. So if a war is thrust upon the Muslims by the Quraysh, even then Muslims won. The main objective was unfulfilled because the main objective is to pay a homage to the Holy Kaaba. And even in this case, the Quraysh would have a chance to malign the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and put a campaign, propaganda campaign against the Muslims that they had come on a warlike expedition during this sacred period. Thus, fighting would not only be derogatory to the ideal of the Muslims, but would be painful and politically inexpedient for them. So, not only religiously, but politically also, war is not in favor for Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ said to his companions, "Whoso is familiar with the secret paths of this valley, he should lead us." In other words, the Prophet ﷺ sought a different route from the one of the enemy was approaching, so that war could be avoided. Prophet ﷺ warned to avoid the war at any cost, because at that time the objective of the Muslims was not to war but the pilgrimage to Kaaba. So on emerging from the hills, as soon as he sallallahu alaihi wasallam found an open road, the mercy of the Lord's subhanahu wa ta'ala, mercy of the Lord sallallahu alaihi wasallam led his caravan to the right and passed near the place which is known as Sanial Murad. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam diverted the path of the caravan from the original route to the right and reach a place that is called Sanial Murad or Hudaibiya. On the other hand, when the Quraysh army saw the Muslims had abandoned the common route and had taken to a road which led to Mecca, they apprehended a Muslim attack on Mecca. So from this place, the pagans rushed back to the defense of the Mecca. When the Muslims reached Hudaibiya, the Prophet ﷺ's dromedary Qasba sat down on his own volition. The Muslims thought she was exhausted, but Prophet ﷺ observed, "Qasba has not sat down due to fatigue. She has been made to sit by the same power who had prevented Abraha's elephants from entering Mecca." So Prophet ﷺ was understanding everything, because this was the sign from the God that stay here now. And that's why Qasba sat down. The Prophet ﷺ then added, "Today I shall consent to any condition that the Quraysh set for the good of the humanity." So the Prophet ﷺ was determined for peace and for paying pilgrimage to Kaaba at any cost. The Prophet ﷺ ordered his caravan to encamp on this spot. The Prophet ﷺ reported that the place was waterless, whereupon the Prophet ﷺ drew out an arrow from his quiver and gave it to the companions with the instruction that it should be driven into the bottom of the well, which is waterless. Water gushed forth with great pressure, and a spring of the cold water began to flow. The men were then content in halting there. So this was a secret help from the God. The encampment of the Muslims at Hudaibiya set the Quraysh thinking that if the Prophet ﷺ decided to enter Mecca, they would have to lay down their lives to check him. Further, they were greatly worried that the entry of the Muslims in Mecca would destroy their reputation of gallantry in all Arabia, and they would be humiliated. The superintendents of the Kaaba, keeping the keys, and other religious offices will, without exception, go into the hands of the Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So they were worried, not only politically but financially also, because Kaaba was a source of the finance for them, because they get money from the pilgrims. So not only politically but also financially they were worried. After long deliberation, it was resolved to dispatch to the Prophet ﷺ a deputation of sensible men who would on the one hand assess his power and on the other persuade him to return without performing the circumambulating of the Kaaba. So first of all, the chief of the Banu Khaza, Badil bin Waraka, along with a few men, called on Allah's Prophet ﷺ and told him that the armies of the Quraysh were advancing on him like flood waves, and they would not allow him to enter Kaaba. So this was the first deputation who was threatening Muslims that Quraysh are in full rage and they are advancing and they will destroy the Muslims. So this was the threat. The Prophet ﷺ told Badil, carry our message to the Makkans. We have not come to fight. We intend only to pay homage at the Kaaba and perform Umrah. Having discharged this religious duty, we shall return in peace. It would be better to conclude an agreement between the parties for a fixed term. And further, tell them clearly that if they choose to fight, then I swear by Allah, as long as there is a life in my body, I shall continue to fight till Allah send his decree. So on getting the threat, the Prophet ﷺ give them a very clear message. We do not want fire. We do not want war. But if a war is imposed on us, swear to Allah, we will do everything now. So this was a clear message given by the Prophet ﷺ to the deputation. Badil brought the Prophet ﷺ's message to the Makkans and advised them to open the way for Muslims to pay homage at the house of Allah. But the Quraysh charged him with the capitulating to Muhammad ﷺ and in high anger told Badil, even if Muhammad ﷺ has not come for the fight, you shall not permit him to enter the Makkah, nor can we give an opportunity to the Arabs to tell the story of our cowardice. Next, they decided to send Halis, the chief of the Ahabish. The Quraysh calculated that if Muhammad ﷺ repudiated Halis also, his tribe would fully support the Quraysh in the forthcoming war. So this was a very strong tribe, and his chief was sent to the Prophet ﷺ now, and this was a clever move on the end of the Quraysh, because if Halis is humiliated or in other way, so Quraysh expected the support of the Ahabish tribe. So this was a clever move. The Holy Prophet ﷺ recognized Halis and said the Muslims, pass the sacrificial animals before Halis, so that he may perceive that we whom the Quraysh are so eager to fight have come only to perform our religious duty. Halis observed 70 sacrificial animals, shaking with intense starvation. The Ahabish tribe deeply revered the sacrificial animals and was very religious minded. So again, this was a very nice move on the end of the Muslims, because Holy Prophet ﷺ was observing everything very deeply. So because Halis was a chief of a very religious minded tribe, so that's why Holy Prophet ﷺ put forward these sacrificial animals. On seeing the sacrificial animals, Halis was very impressed. So Halis was also convinced of the tyrannical attitude of the Quraysh on one hand and peaceful objectives of the Muslim on the other. He returned without holding a meeting with the Prophet ﷺ. On hearing the sincere talk, the Quraysh flew into a rage and said to him, shut up, Bedouin, you are. You have no capacity to understand these things. On hearing this, Halis' anger knew no bounds. He got in anger. He said to the Quraysh, we have not entered into a treaty with you to prevent the people from paying homage to the Kaaba. So this was the very fierce statement. Halis also told the Quraysh, no member of my tribe would bar Muhammad ﷺ's way to Kaaba to perform the circumambulation. The Quraysh was, so this sport was over now. The Quraysh were shaken by this threat of the Halis, so they coaxed Halis into granting them a period of the grace for deliberation. The Quraysh now planned to send to the Prophet ﷺ a man possessing the greatest wisdom and discernment. So Urwa bin Masud went to Hudaibiya on their behalf. Urwa said to the Prophet ﷺ, Makkah is your home too. If you allowed these men of the various tribes who are base, so now emotional blackmailing is now there. Makkah is your home too. If you allowed these men of the various tribes who are base in stature of to destroy it, the Quraysh would be disgraced forever. And you too would be guilty of humiliating them. You are at the war with the Quraysh, yet this humiliation of the Quraysh does not become of you. So this was the emotional blackmailing now. In accordance with the general custom in Arabia, Urwa repeatedly touched the beard of the Prophet ﷺ during conversation. So this was a custom in the Arabia at that time to convince the person to show the respect, to request him or her or to him by touching the beard like this. Please, please. So Urwa was doing this. At this time, Mughira bin Shaba stood respectfully behind the Prophet ﷺ. Whenever Urwa extended his hand towards the Prophet ﷺ, Mughira would repel it because he was fearing not to get any damage to the Prophet ﷺ. On returning to Quraysh, Urwa told them clearly, O brethren of Quraysh, I have seen the courts of the monarchs like Khosrow and Caesar and Najashi, but I have not seen the same magnificence in any potentate as that of the Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The wonder is that his companions do not let even a single drop of the water of his ablution fall on the ground. They pick up his fallen hair from the ground and do not allow to give it anyone at any cost. I advise you to reconsider your views. From the failure of the Quraysh deputation, the Prophet ﷺ estimated that these deputation on their return do not give a full report of the situation to the Quraysh. So the Prophet ﷺ sent his own envoy, Kharash bin Umayyah, to the Quraysh. But on seeing him, first the Quraysh killed the camel on which he was mounted and then made a bid to kill him too. But Ahabish intervened and saved his life. The Meccans' policy proved it beyond doubt that they harbored spite and ill will against the Muslims. Meanwhile, the Quraysh sent some men towards the Muslims at the night who hurled stones and shot arrows at the Muslims' caravan. The Muslims at once fell upon them, made them captive and produced them before the Prophet ﷺ. And how did the pride of the universe ﷺ treat them? Because he was not in the intention of the war. So the Prophet ﷺ released all the culprits. Prophet ﷺ wanted nothing but peace and reconciliation. Similarly, he had profound regard for the sacred period and for Hudaibiya, which lay in the vicinity of the sacred house of the Allah. The Quraysh were much ashamed at the capture and prompt release of their men. They were at last convinced that Muhammad ﷺ had not come with warlike intentions. The Quraysh, so after all, they understood the Prophet ﷺ and Muslims are not coming with the intention of war. The Quraysh also felt that if they took some unjust action against the Muslims, the Arab would criticize them and regard every action of the Muhammad ﷺ against them as justified. So they come to the conclusion now. Not to spare any effort at keeping peace, the Prophet ﷺ decided to give another chance to the people of the Makkah and sent a wise Muslim as envoy to the Meccans. The Prophet ﷺ asked Umar to proceed to Makkah and hold negotiations with the Quraysh. Umar deemed it a great privilege to sacrifice his life for his master, but on the principle, he submitted to the Prophet ﷺ. O Prophet of Allah, you are well aware that the people of the Makkah regard me with great hostility and ill will, for I have never shown them leniency in the matter of the religion. Secondly, there is no one of my clan in the Makkah at this time to take me under his protection. I suggest that Usman can perform this service better than me. The Prophet ﷺ adopted this suggestion and dispatched Usman to Mecca, where one of his kinsmen, Aban bin Said, took him under his protection. Usman held parleys with the Quraysh, but they made it clear that they would on no account allow Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions to enter Mecca. They said to Usman, "Since you are here, you may perform Umrah." But Usman replied, "Never until Allah's Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam performs the circumambulation, I cannot do so." The negotiation between the Usman and the chiefs of the Quraysh broke down. Usman should have returned Hudaybiya within the prescribed limit of the time, but the Meccans detained him for some time. Usman's absence gave rise to the increasing doubts among the Muslims. Suddenly, a rumor began to circulate that the Meccans had martyred Usman. So this was the rumor spread. This report about Usman made the Muslims restless. Every one of them was ready to draw the sword to avenge Usman's blood. The Prophet ﷺ was deeply grieved that the Meccan had slain Usman in this sacred month. He ﷺ declared, "I shall not withdraw from here without fighting them." After this, he ﷺ took his seat under a tree and invited the Muslims to take the oath of the jihad. Each Muslim passionately came forward to take the oath, but he would prefer death to fight. It was an oath of fighting to death against those who had slain Usman in this sacred period. So this oath was called fighting to death. These oath takers receiving attestation of Allah's goodwill for them, Allah Almighty revealed, Allah was well pleased with the believers when they swore alliance unto these beneath the tree, and he knew what was in their hearts, and he sent down peace of reassurance on them, and hath rewarded them with the near victory. When all the Muslims had taken the oath, the Prophet ﷺ placed his right hand upon his left hand like this and observed, "This is the hand of Usman." Regarding this Bai'at one, Allah Almighty observed, "Lo, those who swear alliance unto thee, Muhammad, swear alliance only unto Allah. The hand of the Allah is above their hands." So this was the approval sent by the Allah that you are doing okay. As a matter of fact, the report of the Usman's martyrdom was false. Meanwhile, the news of his being alive and well reached the camp. When the pagans of the Mecca heard reports of the zeal, excitement, and the spirit of the devotion among the Muslims, they felt afraid because news were going there also, and they heard that Muslims are in full rage on the rumor of slaying the Usman. All the Quraysh chiefs assembled at the Darul Nadwa and deliberated upon the next move. They ruled out fighting, but wished to find a way to send back the Muslims this year and allow them to return for pilgrimage the following year. Thus their prestige among the Arabs would not suffer any setback. So this was the next move which was coming in Quraysh mind. In pursuance of this policy, they sent to the Prophet ﷺ as Meccan envoy Suhail bin Umru, who was wise and well versed in all the arts of the negotiations and diplomacy. At Hudaybiya, there were several rounds of the talks between the Muslims and the Quraysh. At last, after long deliberations and compromises, it was resolved to conclude a treaty which would be subject to revision after 10 years. The terms of the treaty were verbally. The Prophet ﷺ summoned Ali and ordered him to put the terms of the treaty in writing. The Prophet ﷺ dictated the following text to Ali: "In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful." According to ancient Arab custom, the letters were begun with the words in the name of Allah. They were not familiar with the superscription in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. So the Suhail bin Umru objected to, in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, and suggested that ancient customary superscription should be written. The Prophet ﷺ agreed and ordered Ali to write as Suhail suggested. Ali did as he was told. Next, the Prophet ﷺ dictated, Allah and his Prophet approves of this peace treaty. Suhail raised the objection, if we acknowledge you as Allah's Prophet ﷺ, there remains no contention between us. You should write Muhammad bin Abdullah. Ali had already taken down the Muhammad ﷺ's dictation. However, the Prophet ﷺ asked him to write as Suhail suggested. Ali submitted, O Prophet ﷺ, O Prophet of Allah ﷺ, I have already written and cannot willingly delete it with my pen. The Prophet ﷺ said, all right, let me see where you have written my name. Ali indicated the spot by putting his finger on it. The Prophet ﷺ rubbed off the words. In their place, Muhammad bin Abdullah was substituted. So these were the events. Now we are going to read the terms of the truce of the Hudaibiya. The Muslims would return to Medina without performing Umrah this year. So this was the first condition. Next year they will come, but will return after a stay of 3 days. Next is they will carry no arms, but will come armed with a sword only, and the sword shall be sheathed, and the scabbard shall be wrapped in a bag. Next is they shall not carry away with them any Muslim residents of the Makkah, and shall not prevent any Muslim of their own party from staying on in Makkah if he wishes to do so. If any Meccan pagan or Muslim migrates to Medina, he shall be returned. But if a Muslim migrates to Makkah, he shall not be returned. Next is the Arab tribes shall be free to conclude agreements with either party. Next is this agreement shall be valid for 10 years. So these were the conditions of the truce of the Hudaibiya. Apparently these were looking very weak conditions as far as Muslims are concerned, and this was looking humiliating, but the secret was something else, and God's will, and Holy Prophet ﷺ was understanding everything. During the process of treaty, a Muslim, Abu Jandal, who had fled from the Quraysh, reached there. Suhail bin Amr claimed that the terms of the treaty had been agreed upon when Abu Jandal reached here. So the Holy Prophet ﷺ agreed to send him back to Makkah. In Hudaibiya, the tribe of the Khaza entered into an alliance with the Prophet ﷺ, and the tribe of Banu Bakr allies itself with the Quraysh. On hearing clauses 3 and 4 of the agreement, the Muslims were seriously disturbed. Every Muslim was burning with rage. The lovers of martyrdom wanted a decision by battle, but respect and reverence for the Prophet ﷺ constrained them to remain quiet. They dared not speak. However, they were complaining with a bated breath that peace had been concluded from a position of the weakness. After the settlement of the terms of the peace, the Prophet ﷺ advised the Muslims to take off the ihram. Since the situation had taken a contrary turn to their intense eagerness for paying homage to the Kaaba, the Muslims were crestfallen and were rather slow in obeying the Prophet ﷺ's suggestion. All were very sad now and feeling that we are not paying the homage to the Kaaba, and the truce of the Hudaibiya is not looking apparently good for Muslims. So all were very sad. They hoped too that their hesitation might induce the Prophet ﷺ to change his policy and bring it in the line with their desires. On the other hand, seeing the intransigence of the people in the face of the divine purpose, the Prophet ﷺ was deeply moved and in a mood of the sorrow went to the mother of the faithful Salma. Observing signs of the pain and sorrow on his sacred face, Salma inquired the reason, whereupon the Prophet ﷺ told her about the affair. Because Prophet ﷺ was observing everything, he was looking everything, Muslims were hesitating of taken off their ihram. So he went to the Salma, the mother of the faithful, and told her the whole story, who was very wise and intelligent. Salma suggested, O Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do not ask anyone to do anything. Just take off your own ihram. The Prophet ﷺ did so. The companions now perceived that the Prophet ﷺ would not amend his decision. The situation then took a dramatic turn, and the Muslims waited with one another to take off the ihram and shaving their heads. The Prophet ﷺ stayed in Hudaibiya for 3 days after the conclusion of the peace treaty. In the course of the return journey to Medina, Surah Al-Fatiha was revealed. Surah Al-Fatah was revealed. We have granted you an open victory. What was regarded as defeat by all the Muslims was termed as victory by Allah. So the thing which was looking as a defeat for the Muslims at that time, that was looking a victory by the God. On the surface, it seems strange that the treaty which the Muslims had concluded from a position of the weakness should be called a manifest victory. But later events made it clear that the truce of the Hudaybiya was really a forerunner to a great victory in the history of the Islamic movement. Hitherto, a state of the war had existed between the Muslims and the unbelievers, and they were socially apart. This peace treaty put an end to this situation. Now the Muslims and the non-Muslims came to Medina without fear and stayed for months, during which they had free social communication with the Muslims. Thus they got an opportunity to see the members of this new Islamic party at close quarters. The visit to Medina affected them in a strange way. They found the people whom they had regarded with contempt and anger much superior to their own people in dealings and habits. So this was a thing which was helpful for the Muslims, which was helping Islam to spread, that people from Makkah are coming to Medina now, and they were looking by themselves everything, the dealings, the way of living, everything, and they were getting impressed. So this was the very big advantage. Again, they saw these servants of the Allah whom they had fought, harbored no hate of the enmity against them, what they hated as their false creed and customs. The speech of the Muslims was inspired by sympathy and humanity. Despite the fact that they had fought so many battles against each other, they received from the Muslims unstinted sympathy and fair treatment. During this social communication, the non-Muslims had ample opportunities of discussing their doubts and objections against Islam. These discussions made it clear to the non-Muslims that they had been greatly misguided and misinformed about Islam. In short, under these circumstances, the hearts of the non-Muslims voluntarily inclined towards Islam. The misunderstandings which their chiefs had created in their hearts began to be dispelled. So the numbers of the converts to the Islam in 1 or 2 years after this treaty exceeded the number of the converts at any time before. During this period, some well-known chiefs of the Quraysh also came under the influence of the Islam. They dissociated themselves from the non-Muslims and became the comrades of the Muslims. Among those who accepted Islam in this period was Khalid bin Walid and Umar bin al-As. Sensing this situation, the chiefs of the Quraysh were unnerved. The Quraysh clearly perceived their certain defeat against the Islam now. So this was the topic. Make your notes.